Hello everybody. Welcome to our first annual electronic version of our planner clinic at CMB at Roscoe. I hope this is the only time I have to deliver this electronically. I hope the next time we deliver this it's in person, shaking everybody's hand, getting to know everybody's operation on a one-on-one basis. But due to the circumstances of the COVID-19 pandemic, for your safety and for our safety, we decided to do this electronically for ease of use of you can look at it at your own leisure, and it gives you the ability to filter through what parts of the topics that you need to touch on, whether it's the beginning part, which I'm going to talk on planters, and then as you filter down the line, we're going to get into air drills and talk on some wear items as well. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So the topics we're going to cover SeedStar XP monitor setup. We're going to talk on planter meters, understanding how to set the meters up. We're going to talk on some planter wear items. We're going to talk on properly setting up your air cart, and then we're also going to talk on some air seeder wear items. So the planting process, what really matters? Of course, we understand that our correct population matters. We're always trying to achieve that perfect uniform spacing. And in our area, the biggest thing that is a yield effector is a uniform emergence. So as we get into this, I want you to be thinking about these mainly three key items: population, spacing, and emergence, and all the things that can be affected by setting these planters correctly. So the reason I always throw this slide in, growing with technology, because that's basically what we're doing. We are controlling these planters with a vast amount of technology. So essentially we're growing with technology. Now let's start with the technology timeline. So SeedStar come out in 1997 and it lasted from 97 to 99. Now what differentiates the 97 to 99 is these were controlled with a 4.5 volt CAN system. The reason that is important, today's tractors all run at a 2.5 volt CAN system. So with that being said, you can't take an old planter and plug it into the back of a new tractor and expect it to function. These systems have to be run on their own standalone harness, and they have to be run with a dual CAN or an old single CAN 4.5 volt brown box display. These cannot be run with any modern displays. In 2001 to 2003, we come out with the dual CAN ability. Now what dual CAN meant that this controller could either be ran on the historic 4.5 volt, which we just talked about, or the new style 2.5 volt ISO system, which allows you to hook this to your newer tractor. In 2004 to 2008, we come out with SeedStar Gen 2. This is where we started kind of building the backbone and getting more and more basically screens and run times that are user friendly. This is when Planner at a Glance came. So what Planner at a Glance gave us, that gave us the ability to see multiple rows at one time versus our historic way of waiting for that row to scan. So we could spot a problem quicker in real time going down the field. In 2009, this is where we really started packing some technology in. So in 2009, this was the first year that gave us the ability to have, it gave us section control, which gave us a 60-inch row spacing, the ability to control to shut off for overlap. It also gave us the ability to have color functionality. Now these systems can only be run on 2600s, 2630s, and Gen 4 monitors. Now the brown box was no longer in function with these systems. So you as a customer, if you're looking at upgrading planners to go into the SeedStar 2, which can be very quickly identified by this green controller, you need to be running a 2630, 2600, or Gen 4 display to make this planner function. Now 2011, so 2011 allowed us to have the ability to see singulation. It gave us the ability to see coefficient of variation. It gave us also now the ability for the first time to monitor the weight on our gauge wheels, which we're going to talk on a little bit further down the line here. Now, SeedStar XP, if you order a brand new hydraulic driven planter today, SeedStar XP is still what is currently come with a hydraulic dry planter. So this is still a modern system that is used yet today. In 2017 to 2018, so 1 year, Deere had released SeedStar 3 on factory electric dry planters. So what does that mean? So in 2017, if you would have ordered a brand new ExactEmerge planter, it would have come with SeedStar 3. Now, SeedStar 3 is available to be viewed on 2630s and 4600 Gen 4 displays. Now, the thing to keep in mind, if you order a retrofit kit today, so what a retrofit kit does, it allows you to take your historic planter bar and put on all the new technology that's available today as far as electric drive meters and hydraulic downforce. You are going to get SeedStar 3. Now, if you order since 2018, if you would have ordered a brand new electric dry planter, you would have gotten SeedStar 4. Now, what does SeedStar 4 differentiate from SeedStar 3? The biggest thing that is, as far as you as a customer purchasing a planter that you need to know, SeedStar 4 can only be ran on a Gen 4 display. It cannot be run on a 2630, and it cannot be run on a 2600. So that is important for you to know as you're looking at upgrading planters. You also need to understand that you need to upgrade displays. If you do not have a current Gen 4 built into your tractor or a 4640 standalone display. Now, is that a bad thing? Absolutely not. So the beauty of SeedStar 4, as you can see here, it gives us the ability to see a multitude of items at one time. So if we look back at our SeedStar 3, we can only view one screen at a time. Well, as much as we have going on in these planters, all the technology that I'm going to talk about here a little later, there's a lot of things that we want to be watching and have the ability to see multiple items on one screen. SeedStar 4 has some really cool features that we're going to talk about. I think you're going to see the advantages of having SeedStar 4 as we get down the line here. The one thing for those of you that are SeedStar 4 customers, so if you have bought a brand new planter back in 2018, we need to be conscientious of software. So there has been 5 software packages that have been put out since the planters were new. The biggest thing that you need to understand as a customer, don't do any software updates to the planter or accept any updates to this display unless you talk to me or one of our CMB representatives that understand this software that needs to be mated. As you can see down the line here, we have 5 controllers on that planter that have to all jive and match versions to the planter apps and the Gen 4 OS software on the display. So just keep this in mind. Don't do any updates without talking to any of us. And the reason that this is really important, historically on the 2630, if we made a mistake and went up in software, we could always go back. On a Gen 4, we cannot currently backdate software. So once you update that software, you're basically locked into that software version. So that's why this is very important to understand. Don't do any updates without talking to one of us. So what could affect planter singulation? So we talked about now in 2011, we had the ability to monitor singulation, right? We can see our doubles and skips. So here's an example of poor singulation. We have doubles, we have a skip, we have doubles again. So what could affect these items? So here is what we're trying to achieve, right? We're trying to achieve perfect singulation, where we have that nice perfect spacing, that picket fence look. So the first thing that can affect it is vacuum, right? That's how we achieve the correct amount of seeds sucked to the disc. So I just want everybody, these charts are available in your operator's manual. I just want you to understand that there is some differences on what seed disc you have. So if you have a 5E or an XP meter, you are going to have the option to either choose a Pro Max 40 disc, or you're going to have the ability to choose our cell type disc, which would be a standard corn or a small corn disc. And I want you to see the correlation down here on the seeds per pound versus the amount of vacuum that you need to achieve the correct amount of suction so the seed sucks the disc. So you can see when we get up to our Pro Max 40 seed disc, we need a greater amount of vacuum versus a standard corn disc. And I'm going to explain down the line here why. How about our drives? Can our drives affect our singulation? Absolutely, right? So if we got rusty chains on our drive systems, are we going to see meter chatter? Absolutely. How about the condition of our pro shafts? Are they kinked? Are they bound? Are they full of rust? You know, any of that time that you can create a jumping action of that meter, that's going to directly affect our singulation of that assembly. How about speed? Can speed affect our singulation? Absolutely. So the faster we go, the more row unit bounce we have, especially in the area here where we have lots of rocks. The faster we go, the faster the meter's spinning, right? So some of these things you need to keep in mind. It's not so much always electronic problems. It could be operator settings that need to be done to achieve these correct spacings. So while we're talking on tractor speed, this is one important topic that a lot of guys miss. So our planters are relying upon a secondary speed source to to know the correct population, and to B, so it knows how fast that the tractor is moving correctly to spin the drives on the hydraulic drive systems or the electric drive systems at the correct speed. Now, unfortunately, by default, if you buy a brand new tractor today, it is set up to use radar. Now, I can tell you how many of our tractors at our location are ordered with a ground radar anymore. Next to none. What I would say 99.9% of our customers are doing, they are using their Starfire receiver to generate a speed source into the tractor. Now, if the tractor is not configured correctly, you will be using axle speed. Now, how accurate is axle speed? Well, if you got a 420 horsepower tractor pulling a 90-foot planter, there's probably going to be some slip, right? So without true ground speed and reading off axle speed, it is not going to take that tractor slip into consideration. So I want everybody to understand this, and I want everybody to take a look at this page. Because when you're going down the field, you should actually see this little radar indication. Now, it's going to be indicating radar, but if you do not have a radar, if you have your Starfire receiver configured correctly, you will still see the ground radar. If you're going down the field and for the active source here, you see the little line underneath the tractor, that means you are using axle speed. And I've seen axle speed up to 25% off. So 25% off on 26,000 seeds per acre, it ends up being a quite significant number on the amount of population that you could be off and the amount of the speed that you're reading, and your acre counter will be off. So those of you with a R series tractor, so that would be the first R's that had come to configure this, this needs to be done underneath the power strip. So this is on the right hand side in the cab. You take these two screws out here and you lift the power strip out of the way, and there's two little wires hidden underneath there that are tagged radar or GPS. If you have a ground radar, leave it on radar. But the other thing to keep in mind, if you do have radar, there is a calibration procedure to get that radar correct. My suggestion, if you do not have a bunch of hills, if you're not in the really steep hills like out in the Montana region, my suggestion would be just plug it into GPS and you know you have an accurate speed. So this is the example of a dual beam ground radar. Now the reason I brought up the Montana region with a lot of hills is because if you're in really hilly country the Starfire receiver looks off of line of sight. So if you're going up a steep hill, your line of sight is not moving very far ahead, even though you are still traveling a distance up the hill. So that's why if you are in really steep terrain and you're striving for perfect accuracy, the ground radar is probably the solution for you. But if you are in normal rolling terrain like here in the Dakotas, the Starfire receiver is the most accurate and least troublesome system that you can see. Now, on your main screen, if you see this little icon here, basically the little tractor speed source with the red circle around it, that means that the SeatStar controller is not seeing a radar input. And at that point, if you have a hydraulic dry planter, that planter will actually not plant. So if you are getting pre-started up and see this icon, let one of us know. There's some steps we can walk you through on getting that set up properly so that that planter can use the correct speed source. Those of you that have like a 250 planter monitor or a 450, there is nothing wrong with just getting the little magnetic puck type. We can get them for about a third of the price of a ground radar, just a slap on the hood of the tractor, a slap on the roof. Most of our stores all have them in stock, so you can have that speed source to see correct population. So how about our talc application rate? Can that affect our singulation? Well, absolutely. So if in our area, we treat a lot with Avapel, which is helps the pheasants basically get a stomach ache when they're eating our seed corn. The Avapel treatment can be rather sticky. So if you have a bunch of seeds sticking together, that can affect your singulation, right? That can give you a bunch of doubles, or they can bridge up and give you some skips. So the talc is just as important as anything to apply the correct amount of talc. So basically, per unit of corn, we're recommending 5 tablespoons. Now, if you have really sticky kernels, we may have to increase that dose. Or if we have, corn that flows very nice and doesn't have a bunch of treatment on it, we may be able to decrease that amount. But this is kind of just a normal treated corn scenario. It's basically 5 tablespoons per corn unit. Talc graphite. So those of you with the ExactEmerge planters, my recommendation for you would be to use the talc and graphite mix. Now the reason I like the graphite mix in on the electric drive ExactEmerge planters is because there's basically some wear items in there, some component on component. So there's the bowl that rides on the meter housing, and then there's some handoff transition from the bowl to the brush. And what the graphite does, it gives basically a coating on the seed that gets onto the internal components of the meter assembly and creates a less friction barrier to help protect the wear against them items. So that's why on those of you with the ExactEmerge planters, I would recommend using the graphite mix. So how about our disc selection? Can our disc selection affect our singulation? Absolutely. So we need to understand the differences in the discs. So at the top here, this is a ProMax 40. Now the ProMax 40 is just what it says. It's a 40 cell disc, but this is not a cell type normal disc. This disc has a flat spot on it. So as you look at our standard corn disc, this has deep cells where the kernel lays into the disc itself. Now, this is very good disc if you have consistent seed. If you have a consistent medium round corn seed and it's a nice, no variation in the seeds, the standard corn disc does a very good job. Now, where the ProMax 40 comes into play is if a couple years ago, a lot of the Dakotas had poor pollination. So some of the seed corn had some variation in it. We had some small rounds. I've even seen some flats within my rounds. What this gives you the ability, it doesn't necessarily care as much that it's a large round or a medium round. With a non-cell type, it is basically going to vacuum the seed up flat onto the plate, and it doesn't have to lay in a cell like the cell type discs. So the Promax 40, if you're getting some inconsistency in seed, the Promax 40 is more forgiving than a cell type disc. The other thing I like about the Promax 40 is, especially in 30-inch rows, if you're planting at them higher populations, with the 40 cells, the meter actually will spin slower than our standard traditional 30 cell type. Now, do you see an importance of what I just said? So we're going to talk on planter setup. Do you think that would make a difference in the planter setup if you actually had a 30 cell disc physically put in the planter, but in the monitor we had it set as a 40 cell? Well, absolutely, right? So it's going to be doing its calculations for 40 seed holes on that disc when we physically have a 30. So a lot of guys get into trouble not understanding the differences. So that's why I'm bringing this up. I want you to look at the back of your seed disc, and there's a part number printed on the back of the seed disc. If you come into this drop down, the part numbers are in there as well. So it's very easy to get the correct one selected, but this is a very common miss when guys are setting up their planters. They'll go plant and all of a sudden their population is way higher than what they had set in the monitor. This is the first place I have everybody look. And to find this, we just come in and go into the planter setup page, and then we come into letter H, the seed setup, and this is where we come in and select our crop name, and then what type of disc we're using, and then what actual physical part number of the disc that we're using. So for those of you doing crop changeover between corn and soybeans, we need to be changing the physical components outside on the meters, but we also need to be coming into the monitor and changing our crop type and our crop disc type. So I want everybody to understand how to change these crop seed disc types. Now, we also have to do some meter settings. So now everybody understands how to set it in the monitor, right? Now, we need to go out and do some physical meter changes. So those of you with XP meters or MaxiMerge 5E or MaxiMerge 5 meters, we have a double eliminator. So if you are going to use the Promax 40, you are going to be utilizing the double eliminator. And what the double eliminator does, it basically does what it's called. It eliminates the doubles. So as your seed is laying on that flat plate there, there's a pretty good chance that there's maybe 2 or maybe even 3 seeds being sucked to that hole, depending on your seed size. Now, when that seed comes around, it hits this double eliminator, and the depth of that double eliminator determines what size of seeds are knocked off and which one is allowed to stay. So on the XP meters, we have basically 3 hash marks that we look at to set this double eliminator. On the MaxiMerge 5, which I'm going to talk about later, we actually have a nice readout indicator on different positions, up to 10 positions. Now, the other thing you need to keep in mind is the knockout wheel. So as we had talked earlier, you've seen that the Promax 40 had basically a 15% increase in vacuum, right? So now with vacuum, we are holding them seeds in much tighter here. With the Promax 40, there is a chance that a broken kernel could get stuck in one of these holes. So that's why we use the knockout wheel. So this is on the lid, which is right here. And what the knockout wheel does, when it comes around after it hands the seed down the seed tube, the knockout wheel will push the extra piece out of that seed disc. Now, where guys get into trouble is when we switch over to soybeans. When they switch over to soybeans, they slap the soybean plate in and away they go. What will happen is, with this knockout wheel running in the soybean plate, it will, 1, destroy the soybean plate, and 2, it will destroy the knockout wheel. So when you're doing a crop changeover, you need to be changing the plate. We need to be lifting the double eliminator back all the way up out of the way when we go to soybeans. And we need to be taking the knockoff wheel out and putting basically the wiper in there that just rubs against the plate. We do not want the knockoff wheel running in our soybean disc. So very important for you guys to understand. The other thing I want you to understand is the brush change. So remember how I said with this non-cell type plate that the seeds will lay higher on that plate. So with them being higher on that plate, we need another step in that brush. We need basically a lower point so that seed doesn't get wiped off the plate. If you leave your standard soybean brushes in and you go plant with really large corn seeds, they will contact that brush and it will just start knocking every other seed off that plate. So why can't we leave the triple step brush in when we go to soybeans? What can happen when we go to soybeans with the triple step brush in it, and if we have our CCS pressure really high and we don't know it, it can actually push the soybean seeds past the brush and overfill down to the seed tube. So it can actually way overplant by pushing air from the CCS system in and pushing the seeds down the seed tube. So that's why we're changing that brush from the ProMax 40 over to soybeans. So here's that brush I'm talking about. So this is the brush for the ProMax 40. And this brush is only used on the ProMax 40. This is the only scenario that that brush is being used on. And here's just a quick picture of that knockout wheel. This is what I had called earlier a cell type disc. So whether we had the standard corn, the small corn, the sunflower, or a soybean disc, all these have that little pocketed cell where the seed can actually lay into a little pocket on the disc. In them scenarios, we want to use, just basically the double step brush and just the wiper that wipes on the back of the disc. So this is very important. A lot of guys mistake this or don't understand this. So that's why I hope this will help you understand what you need to do for crop changeover. So with you remember I talked about the ProMax 40 having increased vacuum. One flaw in the XP system is when we get into heavy wheat stubble. And what happens in heavy wheat stubble is that we have a lot of residue blowing behind the planter. And the way the meter housing exhausts itself from the vacuum is it basically creates almost a suction up the seed tube. And when we get into that high residue, that suction up the seed tube can actually cause debris to get into the seed. And in this scenario, we have a piece of debris that got stuck in the double eliminator. Well, guess what? Now we have a whole bunch of skips out there due to that piece of debris laying in there. So those of you with XP planter, there is a retrofit kit that allows, instead of venting through the seed tube, once that vacuum passes around, it allows it to vent out the lid itself. So there is a seal change that lays in around there to make sure that this whole outside is sealed very tight, and that way that exhaust can be, that vacuum draw can be done here versus drawing up the seed tube where there's more residue to be drawn up. So let's talk about singulation after it leaves the meter. Can our seed tube affect it? Absolutely. So I've seen a lot of scenarios where I've been out on service calls and customers have said, boy, I got one row that my singulation and my depth is just all over the board and I can't understand why. First thing I'll do is pull the meter assembly and grab the back side of the seed tube, and 90% of the time what I find is that the seed tube flops up and down. Well, what caused that is there's a little hook here that the last time the seed tube was pulled, it did not get hooked back in that groove. So if that does not get hooked in that groove, that basically seed tube can just bounce around and free float around in there, causing inconsistent depth and causing poor singulation. Another item that gets severely overlooked after the seed leaves the seed tube to affect singulation is our rock guard. So our rock guard provides more function than just protecting the seed tube. In our heavy no-till scenarios, what the rock guard provides, it provides a stop against blade flex. So as we get into them heavy no-till situations, our blades are actually forced together. When they're forced together, we actually lose the width of our trench. So as you see on where there's a worn guard over here, you can see that our trench gets a lot narrower. Where we have a good guard that is not worn, our trench actually stays nice and wide. So where we get into that heavy no-till, we start losing depth and we start giving the ability for them seeds to lay in different positions as the width of the opening is. So guys, this is a big wear item that gets severely overlooked as our rock guard. Those you using totally tubulars, if you're to the point that the tubes are wearing shut and you're taking a cordless drill to drill out the tubes, I can guarantee you that them rock guards on the edges are worn severely if you're already to the point of re-drilling out them tubes on them totally tubular. So these provide a very important function, especially like I said in the area here where we're heavy no-till. So how about our downforce? Can our downforce affect our singulation? Absolutely. Our downforce affects our ride quality, and of course it ultimately affects our seed depth. So we have 6 types of downforce that I want you to understand. So our first type of downforce is no downforce. So that is basically the static weight of the row unit, and if you have 1.5 or 3 bushel boxes on there, the weight that's on them boxes is basically the amount of downforce we have. Our next type of downforce is spring downforce. So we've seen this a lot in the 7000 and 7200 planters where we had spring downforce. So the first system was the only way we could change it was by adding and removing springs. When we evolved in the spring system, we come out with the system that had the availability to have a little bit of adjustability per field conditions. From there, we went to pneumatic downforce. Now, what pneumatic downforce gave us, this gave us a quicker changeover from field to field. So as we look at this chart here, as we presume down the line here, we are going to be talking about pounds of downforce. Now, this is where guys get confused. Guys are historically used to talking air pressure. So in correlation, if we have 80 psi of air pressure in the system, that correlates to 450 pounds of downforce. So we're no longer going to be talking about air pressure. We are going to be talking about pounds of downforce. So remember I talked about in 2011, we come out with the ability to monitor our downforce. This was called set point downforce. So this was driven off of an electric compressor. And this gave us the ability to, it gave us the ability to monitor the weight on the gauge wheels. So we had a weigh pin on select rows that gave us the ability to monitor the weight on them gauge wheels. It gave us the ability to monitor margin. Now I'm going to talk a little more on margin here in a minute. But what set point did, it allowed us to monitor the margin, and then we would preset how many pounds of downforce we wanted pushing down on that row unit. In 2012, we come with the option available called active downforce. Now, what active downforce was, for the first time, it gave us to have the ability to change the downforce on our planter while going through the field autonomously. So it did it automatically. So what it did, it watched the weight on these gauge wheels, and we told it that we wanted, per se, 50 pounds of margin, so 50 pounds on the gauge wheels. This system would automatically try to maintain the amount of gauge wheels that we had, the amount of weight on the gauge wheels that we had preset. This was done with a hydraulic driven air compressor. So if you see the hydraulic driven air compressor on the back of the planter, you have an active system. So in our area, we quickly realized that the active air system was too slow. So in our area, we are heavy no-till, right? So most of the time, these systems are up around the 350 to 400 pounds of downforce, which, as you've seen in that chart earlier, that correlates back to about 100 to 120 psi of air pressure. Now, 120 psi of air pressure is where the system maxes out. Now, think about this. When you're filling up the air in your semi-tire and you are starting to match tank pressure, that last 10 pounds takes a long time to get into that tire, right? Versus if the tire is flat and you're taking it up to 20 pounds, that first 20 pounds goes in really fast because we got 120 pounds of air pressure pushing behind it. So how that affects our system is in our no-till, where we're relying upon them higher pressures to make good ground contact, the system just cannot respond fast enough. So that is where hydraulic downforce have come. And hydraulic downforce is a very, very nice feature in this area. So what that does, that gives us individual row monitoring. So with the active system, it was an average. So if you had 5 weigh bars on that planter, it took an average of the 5, and then it would adjust the whole planter accordingly. With hydraulic downforce, factory installed from John Deere or retrofit installed with a John Deere retrofit, this gives us the ability to control the downforce on a single row by row operation. The other thing is this system reacts 5 times in 1 second. So this is an extremely fast system and an extremely accurate system. So let's talk about, I told you I'd explain this margin, because it don't matter if you are working on a set point system or if you're working on a new hydraulic downforce system, you need to understand downforce margin. So all these numbers that we're going to be setting in the monitor is going to be margin. Now what margin is, it's basically the weight on the gauge wheels. So as the system is pushing down, we have a downforce. So we have 80 pounds of downforce pushing in our air system. We have a row unit that weighs 120 pounds. So essentially we have 200 pounds pushing down. Now, our opener blades are trying to fight their way back out of the soil, right? They're trying to lift themselves out of the soil, especially the harder the soil gets. So in this scenario, we're going to use 150 pounds of fight that row unit's trying to lift out of the ground. So we take our downforce of 200 minus our 150 pounds that's trying to fight us back out of the ground. That gives us 50 pounds of margin. So we have 50 pounds of weight on our gauge wheels. So how do we know how much margin we want on the gauge wheels? So our gauge wheels do more than set depth. The gauge wheel on a John Deere planter actually kind of establishes our trench. So if you take a look here, so in this scenario, we did not have enough downforce. Basically, our seed trench just crumbled. It was in dry, powdery soil. It just crumbled, and now we have very inconsistent seed depth. In this scenario, it was a wet year, like last year. We had very wet, saturated soils. In this scenario, we had way too much downforce, so we actually just basically slabbed a cement wall. And with that cement wall, we have basically no opportunity to close that trench up if we have way too much downforce on it. And what we're ideally looking for is this guy here. So we're creating a nice track. We're firming the sidewalls so we don't have the crumbling action, but we're not forming it so hard that it's a cement wall that we can't close up with our closing wheels. So here you can kind of see what you're looking at walking behind the planter with the closing wheels tied up. So here they're all crumbled in. In this case, you can see the gauge, I mean, it's just a cement slab. And in this scenario, this is what we're trying to achieve, where you can see the tracks, but it's not overpacked. So what can affect our downforce? Okay, our first thing is our soil compaction, right? So on our headlands where our grain carts have traveled or our trucks have traveled, we have soil compaction. So that is affecting our downforce. How about our row cleaners? So if we have row cleaners that are row unit mounted, as soon as we make an adjustment on them row cleaners, them are going to directly affect the lift on that row unit. If we let our row cleaners down, it's going to try to lift that row unit some more. So the main moral is here is if you're making adjustments, like some of these items I'm going to talk about, you need to be conscientious of what's changing as far as how that trench is being firmed by them gauge wheels. How about our drawbar hitch height? This is one that a lot of guys don't think about, is our drawbar hitch height. If we don't let our drawbar all the way down, or if we unfold in the field and we leave it all the way up, that is going to affect our downforce. That's going to change basically the angle of the parallel arms and the closing wheel. So we need to be, when we're setting this, we need to be understanding where our parallel arms are sitting and where our closing wheels are set. How about worn opener blades? If we have worn opener blades, that is going to affect our downforce because the blades are not going to do a good job of cutting. So therefore that soil resistance is going to be higher trying to lift that row unit more versus using good sharp blades to cut through the soil. And then of course our closing wheels. On some testing that I had done, by moving the handle 1 notch can affect the row unit lift by up to 50 pounds. So if you have everything set and you're happy with it, and all of a sudden you decide, hey, I need to set my closing wheels a little tighter, and you move that handle, that is going to make a big direct effect on how that planter row unit is affected. So on the XP systems, I told you we have the ability to monitor it. How this monitoring system works, it is basically a weigh pin, just like on your grain cart or feed wagon. And if you think about how many times after you unload that grain cart or unload that feed wagon that you have to re-zero them load cells, it's no different here. The system is only good as the inputs that are coming from them components. So on my system on my farm, every day I come in and zero my load cells. So how this works, you come into the planter setup page, and then we go under sensor, and then we go to downforce, and what we're going to do, we're going to lift the planter all the way in the air, and we're going to hit this 0 button. And what it's going to do, it's going to zero all these out. And I've come out after planters have been sitting in the shed over the winter, and I've seen some of these reading 500 pounds when the planter's in the air. They've picked up resistance and moisture throughout the winter that causes inaccurate reading. So this is very important to understand, especially those of you guys with the hydraulic downforce that is using row by row, where every row has one of these weigh pins. This is a very, very crucial that you come in and zero these and make sure that these are at a 0 value with the planter raise. Now you may come in here and look and see that they're reading 0 and say, well, I'm good to go, I don't need to zero them. That is incorrect, because these values will not read a negative value. So one of these sensors could show 0, but it's really reading like a negative 200 value. You will not see that negative number. So even though you see 0 there, it is still a very good idea to go in and actually zero them weigh bars out so that they know what 0 point is. Frame weight distribution. So frame weight distribution had come as a factory installed option on 1770 and 1775s in 2017. And then in 2018, it gave us a factory option available to put onto the DB series planters, the DB 60 and smaller. So if it is a 5-section planter, DB 80, DB 90, we cannot factory install frame weight distribution. And what frame weight distribution is, it is a very cool option. I have it on my own planter and I absolutely love it. So what frame weight distribution does, it will allow us to take the weight off the main frame and transmit it to the wings. So historically, we're used to hanging suitcase weights on the wings, and when we go through that mud hole, what's the first thing to sink into the mud? The main frame, right? So this cylinder takes the weight off the main frame and transmits it out to the wing wheels. So that way we don't have to hang them suitcase weights. We can actually utilize the weight that's on the planter. It also helps us take the weight off that center frame. So in really muddy scenarios or high compaction areas, it doesn't have as much weight on that main frame. And this is fully adjustable. You can go all the way from 0 PSI all the way up to 2500 PSI. Most cases that I've run the planter, it's been around 1600 PSI right in the middle, and that works very sufficiently. So that being said, we have a broad range of higher or lower from normal operating range. This system also has a large accumulator tied in always get the question is, what happens if I go through a big crick bottom and that wing really needs to go up fast? Is it going to bend the frame? No. This system has on the back of the planter has a very large accumulator that if you go through a washout or something very quickly, it can absorb that oil pressure so you don't do any damage to the frame. This is probably one of the most questions I get every year. I'm glad I'm able to publicize this via technology so you guys can come back and maybe do some screenshots and correlate back to this when you're hooking up your planter. So this is on a 1770 or a 1775 planter. So the first thing we want to do is hook up our variable rate drive pressure on this connection here. This is the pressure port out of the Power Beyond. The next connection we want to make is our variable rate drive return. Now keep in mind that these hoses you cannot couple with the tractor running, especially the pressure, because if the tractor is dead hitting pressure at 3100 psi, that's how much pressure is going to be at that coupler. So the best thing I can tell you is have your tractor shut off when you're making these connections. The next thing is our lift pressure, our lift and fold. So on a 1770, our lift and fold are on the same circuit. So pressure on this side, return on this side. If you have a drawbar pulled 1770 or 1775, this is where our pressure is going to go and our return. So now you can see I'm changing the sides of the pressure and return. So when we hook up our first vac fan, we're actually going to hook the return on the left side of the machine, and we're going to hook our pressure on the right side of the machine. And the reason I urge you to hook it up this way is the lever will be clicked forward in your tractor to make the vac fans run. And what it allows us to do is when we shut the fans down, it allows us to push that lever all the way ahead directly in the float to give them vac fans a nice smooth shutdown rather than having to go through the overrun bypass valve to shut down. It's a lot easier on them fans when we can shut them down and allow them to go into float mode. If we have a 24 row with 2 vac fans, we're going to hook in the second vac fan the exact same way. And these are optional if you got hydraulic driven fertilizer, if you got GFX row cleaners. It's just optional hookups that we can use. This one probably should have been the first one I had hooked up. The motor K-string, when you're hooking up these planters, should be the first connection you make. And the reason is if this motor K-string is not hooked up and you run the vac fans or if you run the hydraulic drives on this planter, any motor leakage has to go back through the motor K-string. If that connection is not hooked up, there is a potential that you could basically push out all the seals on them motors. Now, if you notice, there is a special tip on there, a special flat face tip. And what that tip is designed to do is if you do accidentally forget to hook it up, at 10 psi, that tip will open up, allowing oil to drain out on the ground. So if you have an older tractor that has a Pioneer end here versus that flat face tip, do not change the end on your planter. Convert your tractor over to that flat face style tip. In case it would happen to come unhooked or someone would forget to hook it up, at least you do have some protection if you forget to hook that hose up. The frame control, that should be a connection at the that you route out of the cab. We also have the hitch connection. If you have a hitch or marker planter on a 1770 or 1775. Of course, our ISO connector, which does our communication from our display back to our planter. And then our lights. So I get a lot of phone calls, guys call and say, my planter won't fold and unfold. What's wrong? The first thing I ask them is, did you hook up the light connector? And they say, well, no, we don't need flasher lights. We're driving down the gravel road. The light connector is what powers the fold and unfold. So your planter will not fold and unfold without the light connector plugged in. So you do need that light connection plugged in. So let's talk about DB. So the Deerbauer. These connections are going to be made a little differently as there's different circuits on a DB. So our variable rate drive pressure and return, that part is going to stay the same. Frame raise and lower should be on SCV number 1. Now, as you know, on a DB, we have a separate circuit for the fold. So on the 1770, our frame pressure raise and lower, and our fold were on the same circuit. On a DB, we have fold on one circuit and frame on the other circuit. So we want these hooked in this scenario. And then if we have a DB80, DB90, or DB120, we're going to have a separate circuit for the tongue, and that should be hooked into SCV number 3. We have our VACs, so same as the 1770, we put our return on the left side and our pressure on the right side, so that way we can have that lever in the forward position while going through the field, so we can float them when we shut them off. And then this is optional, or if we have additional vacuums on that planter. So there's our motor case drain, the same as that 1770. Our light connector, which we need to have hooked up. Our ISO implement connector. Our frame control. And we also have a new one called constant power on the DBs. And what the constant power connection is for, that is for is if we have a liquid rate controller, our foot switch circuit passes through there, and that also powers, gives us our 12-volt power back to our air compressor for running active pneumatic or set point downforce. So there is another connection in there as well. Section control. So section control, as I had said earlier, come in 2008. They have to be controlled into 60-inch seed spacing. So if you have a 20-inch planter, you're going to be controlling 3 rows at a time. If you have a 30-inch planter, you are going to be controlling 2 rows at a time. Sections are based on settings in these monitors as far as turn on, turn off times, and then also as far as offsets entered in. Those of you that are new to section control, I encourage you to talk to one of us about understanding and help setting up that section control. So shared coverage and guidance. Shared coverage is a feature that's available on 2630s and Gen 4s, and what that allows us to do is if we have multiple machines running in the field, we can actually share coverage. So that way, if one planter plants the headland, the other planter, the section control, will work when we cross that headland. So a shared coverage feature is an extremely nice feature if you have multiple planters running in the field. As I talked with section control, there is a lot of guys that put these on and they absolutely love them. What they are is just an indicator light. It gives you peace of mind that your section control meters are turning on and off at the right time. Those of you that have now went to electric drive planters, I know that you greatly miss the indicator light for peace of mind. If you do have an electric drive planter and want this back, come talk to me. I'm working on a way to get this actually tied into the fertilizer section control so we can still see that light if we're using the same turn on and turn off settings as our planter meters, so we can get a little bit of peace of mind back with that nice function of that light. So let's talk about Maxim Merge 5 meter configuration. So this meter can be configured basically in 6 different scenarios. This is 99% of what we sell out of our trade area. It's the mini hopper that's bulk fill with CCS. We do have some insecticide options. We have some 3-bushel options, and we also have some twin row with box options with the Maxim Merge 5. The big thing that come in Maxim Merge 5 is one of them is our gauge wheel arm has changed. So historically, we had on the XPs, we had the bushing that had the full threads. The problem with this was it was an early wear item. Every couple years we were replacing these, which got expensive. In the Maxim Merge 5, we incorporated a couple of heavy bushings inside there. With the threads, this is more than 4 times the wear life of these arms. So if you have an older XP planter and want to add the Maxim Merge 5 gauge wheel arms and bushings, that is absolutely possible. So it's not a big deal to convert them over. These are a very nice upgrade for a wear item on your planter. On the Maxim Merge 5, probably the one big thing that has changed was the mini hopper. So those of you planning large seeds or maybe convection flowers understand the issues of bridging in this elbow. So before we had to come out of the CCS tank, make a 90 degree, and then make a 90 degree again. On the MaxiMerge 5, it is a straight shot in. So now we no longer have that bridging within them two elbows to get that seed delivered to the hopper. The other thing that has changed is our meter shape and basically our seed pocket size. So here you can see the seed pocket is smaller than the MaxiMerge 5. And the advantage of that is if we get on any side hills, we can keep that plate fuller to eliminate any seed loss on that steep side hill. This is what I had referenced earlier, was that new style double eliminator. So before we had them hash marks where we only had 3 settings, so we had kind of a little bit of a gray area where we were setting. On the MaxiMerge 5, we actually have a nice number readout from 0 to 10. So we can just simply turn this knob and get our nice readout of where we need to be with that double eliminator. So once we get one row set where we want to be, we can quickly walk across that planter and set them all the same and be confident that they are all set the same. The other option that has become available is pneumatic closing wheels. The guys that have put the pneumatic closing wheels on really like them. The one advantage is it gives us the ability to change the pressure from in the cab. The other thing is it gives us the ability to have more changes. So here we simply have basically just 4 positions that handle can be in. With air pressure, we basically have almost an infinite amount of changes that can be within that air pressure system. So the other thing that we have noticed is riding behind the planter, following them, we noticed that these kind of clang and banged around a little bit, from the handle and the spring moving. These were very quiet and very smooth with the pneumatic closing system. So these were a very nice upgrade, and these are retrofittable back to older planters as well. So pneumatic closing wheels are new and coming on these new planters. The exciting one is the MaxiMerge 5E. So what the 5E gave us, so we introduced the MaxiMerge 5. The E means electrically driven. So we no longer not have any chains, any sprockets, any hex shafts, any bearings. It is all composed from a nice small brushless motor direct into the meter. What does that give us? That gives us smooth meter speed, and it also gives us some advanced features. One of the really cool features is curve compensation. What curve compensation gives us, that gives us, when we go around a corner, it gives us perfect population throughout that whole planter. So you can see here, I planted 2 circles out in the field, one with curve compensation on and one with curve compensation off. You can see here from my monitor with the curve compensation on, this is meter speed. So these meters are spinning faster than the center, and these meters are proportionately spinning slower than the center. This is done, there's a gyro on the planter, and it calculates as the planter's making around a curve how to run this curve compensation. Now, how does this agronomically impact me, right? So anytime I see these options on these planters, I want to know as a producer, how is it going to agronomically impact me? So this is curve compensation off. So this is where I did the 1 circle with it off. You can see the corn plants are pretty much on top of each other. This is row 1. This is row 24 with the curve compensation off. You can see them corn seeds are spaced very far apart. This is with curve compensation on. So I simply checked the box in the monitor and said turn curve compensation on. This is the inside row with curve compensation on, and this is the outside row with curve compensation on. You can see where my hand is laying. It is perfect, the seed spacing and population from the inside row that was almost completely stopped to the outside row that was doing just about 9 miles an hour. Now, How does this agronomically impact us? Yeah, okay, we can see the corn plants emerging. We can see some are tight, some are far apart, right? So I marked these spots where I put my hand, and I went back and pulled some ears off this corn, and there was the ears off the corn. So you can see this was the inside and outside row with curve compensation on. You can see this is the inside row and the outside row with no curve compensation. So this guy, he was probably 40% moisture when we come to combine. And look at how much yield reduction we had given up from this inside one to this inside one. Yes, our outside row was larger than our other one due to the fact of the wider spacing, and we did get a little drier towards the end of kernel fill. So you can see agronomically how curve compensation really affects them corn cob sizes. And in our area, we have a lot of pothills, so we are constantly making circles with them planters around them potholes. So curve compensation is one of the huge benefits to the electric drive planters. So let's talk on ExactEmerge. ExactEmerge is basically the next step above the 5E. And what the ExactEmerge gives us, that gives us the ability to travel at a faster speed and maintain seed drop accuracy. So how this works is the ExactEmerge row unit, it has basically a high performance meter assembly, a bowl assembly. And what this is, it's a bowl designed to travel at a faster speed. And it also is a more accurate seed bowl. Now, what makes this planter, sets this planter apart from any other planter that has been built is the brush belt technology. And what this allows the planter to do, it doesn't matter how fast you're going, the planter will deliver the seed down to the seed trench perfectly. And how that works is there is a perfect handoff from the seed bowl right into that brush, and that brush traps it. So it doesn't matter how much our row unit's bouncing anymore, it doesn't matter on our population, and it doesn't matter on speed. How that handoff is, once it's trapped in this brush belt, it is trapped in them bristles all the way down to the perfect drop point. And this brush belt travels at the speed of the tractor. So if you're doing 2 miles an hour, this brush belt will hand off that seed perfectly into that seed trench as it would at 10 miles an hour. So that is what makes the ExactEmerge such a precise planter, is once the meter hands it off, it is encapsulated into that brush belt for a perfect handoff at the seed trench. Now the ExactEmerge operates on 2 electric drive motors. Just like that 5E, we have one motor controlling our meter speed based on of course, our population and our speed. The ExactEmerge has a second motor to control the speed of the brush belt to perfectly match ground speed. Now, these electric motors are ran on a 56-volt system. Now, the question is, why are we running this at a different voltage? Everybody, you need to understand is that when voltage goes up, amperage goes down. So we're running at a higher voltage, so we don't need big cumbersome wires to control these systems. So these can be ran with small 14 to 18 gauge wires due to the higher voltage. So that's why we're running a higher voltage system. And with this system, you of course get the enhanced monitoring system. So our electric drive system, the ExactEmerge comes with 2 brushless motors. So brushless meaning they are maintenance free. They're just like your new style cordless drills. They are a brushless system. There is no brush on armature contact to provide wear. And of course our 56-volt system reduces the number of amps per row. Also with the ExactEmerge system, we get a new style seed tube sensor. So those of you that have a seed tube system know that anytime you get a tailwind with a bunch of dust, you can get false readings. On the ExactEmerge system, dust and wind has no effect on the seed tube population. It is reading correct population and singulation as this is encapsulated in the brush belt to get a correct reading that is not affected by dirt. So seed delivery, on our seed tube planter, we have a lot that can happen between here and here. That extends to be a 2.5 foot drop. There's a lot of variables that can happen between here and here. On our ExactEmerge, this is no variables at all the way down. That has that seed encapsulated all the way down right to the seed trench. So our release points, you can see, have greatly gone down where there's margin for error. And one of the really cool things with ExactEmerge, for the first time in seeding history, we have the ability to singulate soybeans. This is a picture I took of a customer's field with his soybeans emerging, and it is like a small picket fence of corn emerging, but with soybeans. So it's very cool to be able to first time accurately singulate soybeans. It may give us the ability to back down some of them populations and save money on seed due to the fact that we are no longer dropping 2 soybeans on top of each other. We are now placing them perfectly where they need to be. So on the electric dry planters will come standard with SeedStar Mobile. SeedStar Mobile is a really cool feature. What SeedStar Mobile gives us the ability to do, it gives us the ability to see a painted map of multiple items on an iPad in the cab. So it basically acts as an additional monitor in the cab. So here's a screenshot of that field that I had just showed you of mine for SeedStar Mobile. So we can see a painted map of ground speed. We can see a painted map of gauge wheel margin, ride quality, population, variety, applied downforce, singulation, seed spacing, and target population. And these maps are can be switched on the go to your viewing needs. This map here, this is actually an applied downforce map. So you can see here that on this hydraulic downforce system, my applied downforce pressure went from basically 0 all the way up to 450 pounds on this little 10-acre field. The really cool thing is that I was not able to pick up on my Gen 4 monitor that I was able to see on the iPad. If you look here, these are the actual wheel tracks of my tractor. So you can see throughout this field where my tractor tires were actually causing additional compaction that the downforce needed to overcome to keep that gauge wheel margin correct. So that it gives you a lot better, a more visible understanding of what's going on with the planter in real time. So as a John Deere dealer and as your CMB dealer, we have basically a portfolio of systems. From our downforce systems, retrofittable onto your older planters, your row cleaners, your AMS equipment, a broad understanding, understanding your meter systems, and then of course understanding how to operate these planters. So we offer a portfolio of solutions. So let's talk on planter wear items. For those of you with ExactEmerge, as you know, you do have more moving components, and there is some more items that need to be inspected for wear. Talk to one of us. We actually have a nice guide that's color to give to you that you can look through and check some of these items as far as wear components in the ExactEmerge planter. So I'm not going to spend a bunch of time going through all the items to look at. The best would be is if you talk to one of us, I'd gladly send you a copy of that wear guide. Another planter wear item that I want to discuss that gets severely overlooked is our GFX row cleaners. In our area, probably 90% of our planters have GFX, the hydraulic downforce row cleaners. And one item that is particular is in the cylinder itself, there is a bushing. And when this bushing fails, the pin actually wears into the housing. And of course, once the housing is damaged, you need to buy a complete new cylinder. So for those of you that have GFX row cleaners, probably the best thing I can tell you to do is maybe pull 1 or 2 of the pins that are pressed through here and take a look and make sure that the bushings are still in good condition. If they are getting in thin condition where it's getting close to the housing, you can save yourself a pile of money by replacing the bushings now before they damage the housing. The other wear item I want to talk about is the bushing on the closing wheel frame. Uh, these bushings are very important to keep that closing wheel frame straight, to keep them closing wheels dead center in that trench. And as a wear item, as the bushings wear, they can wear into this housing itself. Uh, you could put the John Deere bushings back in, but an alternative that we have for you at C&B is actually a repair kit. So what the repair kit gives you is a sleeve that you can weld onto that closing wheel housing and then put a ball bearing in there instead of a bushing. This will 50 times the wear life of this closing wheel assembly and drastically cut expense as far as parts to resurrect this housing rather than having to buy this whole housing itself. Those you with DB planters, you need to be checking the wheel bearings annually. There is a lot of weight on these planters, especially with when you start adding liquid fertilizer onto the frame of the planter. My best advice is to be jacking these planters up every year and be checking the wheel bearings, because you cannot believe the countless service calls that we've been on where the wheel bearings have failed, and guess where the wheel goes? Right out between and through the row unit and out the back. So you need to be checking these wheel bearings on these DB planters, and not only DB all planters, but especially the DB planters annually. Those of you with electric drive planters that have the PTO generation, annually, or maybe if you have, if you're running this planter through large acres, you need to be checking and greasing these splines for sure once a year and possibly multiple times a year. And this is the spline set where the alternator meshes into the gearbox. Those of you with these systems, write down this part number. There is an O-ring that you can actually slip over these splines to prevent dirt from entering and prevent the grease from exiting. This is an update, this O-ring, so write down this part number and install it on your alternator splines. And also I want you to use that heavy duty moly grease as well. At this time I can't take no questions and answers, obviously, as this is a virtual, but I want you to keep in mind you can call any of us at the C&B of Roscoe store. You can call my cell phone direct. My cell phone number is 605-281-6004. Anytime you got questions, you call. We're always here for you to answer any questions that you may have. From here, I'm going to jump into the air seeder portion, and we're going to talk on air drills. So with our air carts, we have quite a few variations on cart tank sizes. We have 2 tanks and 3 tanks on tow between. So what tow between is where the cart is directly behind the tractor. And then we also have tow behind models where the cart is directly behind the seeding tool. We have all the way from 195 bushel all the way up to an 850 bushel configuration. So these the air carts are now available with a hydraulic drive system installed from the factory. What the hydraulic drive option gives us, it gives us almost instant rate change for those of you that are trying to variable rate, and it gives us a smooth meter speed. The one thing I do want to urge you guys with the hydraulic drive systems, so the speed encoder for the meter is actually right here. Just keep in mind that if this chain falls off, you're not going to know it from the cab. The speed encoder is directly driven off the hydraulic motor. So those of you that are getting some age on these air carts, you need to be checking these chains and making sure that they're in good condition, that the tensioners are in good condition, and probably be checking underneath these shields maybe once or twice a day to make sure that this chain is in good condition and that there's no wear on it. So this is very important for those of you with the hydraulic drive air carts. Those of you that do not have a hydraulic drive air cart, have a conventional ground drive air cart, we have at C&B have a great solution that nobody else has pioneered. What this system is, it allows you to take off the ground drive transmission and add in a hydraulic drive motor. So this system will basically take any old air cart. It doesn't matter if it's a 787, a Concord air seeder, or a Horsch Anderson. we have a system that we could pioneer and incorporate on your machine. Simply unbolt the tranny, put on a hydraulic drive motor and the harnessing that we have custom built, and install it on your machine. Now, what does that allow your air cart to do? Well, it allows you to make basically instant rate changes. So this is off of one of my fields. This is an application map. So you can see here, this is what my target rate is, basically from 0 pounds an acre up to 275 pounds an acre on that tank. This is what the cart actually did. So this is the actual application map. So as you can see by the maps, it hit the zone instantly. So it is a very nice way to upgrade your historic air cart to have the accuracy and the functionality of a new cart itself. And this also gives you some other enhanced features where you can see application speed and some of the other enhanced documentation functions that you can view in the Operations Center. So with our air carts, we need to understand the different meters that can be installed in these air carts. The yellow roller, that is our smallest roller, and our blue roller is our largest roller. So as you can see here, I have a rate chart of 1152. So 1152, just say with the yellow roller, we get from 6 pounds an acre to 40. With our black roller, we're 16 to 151. Our green roller takes us from 19 to 220, and then our blue roller takes us from 50 to 265 pounds an acre. So there, you need to kind of understand the range that you're in and the range that you're going to be going, and pick the correct meter itself via the color that's encased in it. New for 2020, this is an aftermarket product, a company that we had partnered with. They have come out with twisted meters, and what twisted meters allows, instead of the historic pulsing that happens within the meter, so the meter is, especially at low rates or when the meter is spinning at a slow speed, you get a pulsing action, and with the new twisted meters, that eliminates that pulsing action. These can be retrofitted onto any meter housing from 1900 to 1910. For those of you with factory hydraulic drive 1910 air carts, you have the ability to either order it or add section command to the factory hydraulic drive 1910 cart. And what this allows you to do, it allows you to control up to 8 gates per meter section to help reduce your input costs. So as you overlap, depending on how your tower configuration is, it will shut down the towers, complete tower manifolds, as you overlap via section control. For those of you with older drills that want to add section control to it, we have paired with a company called Intelligent Ag, and these are a retrofit solution for those of you with older drills that were not factory hydraulic drive equipped. Rather, you either retrofitted our system or you want to maintain your ground drive transmissions. This is the solution as well to install to help basically cut on your input costs by overlap. And this can be done on, if you want to do just one tank, if you want to do just your seed tank, or you can do, if you have a 3 tank, you can do all 3 tanks. So this is a completely customizable system, however you want to customize the install on your cart. 1890, so I just want to run through 1890, 1910 air carts, or any 1910 cart, or the 850 cart. I just want to run through some setup information. So how the system is driven as far as how it calculates the speed to spin the meters, the first thing it needs to know is the tool width, and it needs to know the row spacing. So the first thing you need to do is come in and select your tool, and then you need to also select the tool type and the row spacing. So this is one of the first important points to come in and select. The next thing we need to do is select our rows per primary. So if you have a single chute cart, you're only going to see one column here. If you have a double chute cart, you're going to see 2 columns here. So your top chute would be, or your fertilizer chute would be your T towers, and then your main chute or your seed chute would be your B towers. So you also need to come in here and make sure that the number of secondaries is mated per tower. So this is a circumstance of a 42-foot 1890 with 98899 We also need to tell the controller which tank is assigned to which primary. Now, in this scenario, this is a single chute cart. This is pretty simple because all 3 tanks are only going to flow to that single primary system. But if you have a double chute as an 1895 where you have the triple rank with a double chute, or any other, if you're doing a custom configuration where you're pulling a cart behind a planter, you will have that second, and you need to assign which tank is applying to which primary. So this is very important to understand what's going on. And if for some reason on your main screen, one of the tanks is grayed out where you can't enable it, the reason is because you do not have that tank assigned to a primary. So if I would come in here and uncheck this rear tank, on your main screen, your rear tank would not turn on. So if you're having issues where one of the tanks just won't apply and you can't understand why, maybe for some reason in this tool configuration, this has gotten changed. And to find this page, we simply go to the up arrow below the cart, and then we go to the tool tab, and then this is where our rows per primary setup is. Blockage sensors, I've talked about this before, but I want to bring it up again. For those of you with the new style John Deere ISO blockage, as far as basically what it is the color blockage as you see here. If you're going to be turning towers or individual runs on and off, we need to be using this icon here. This icon here, if you get into here and are unsure what's going on, I'm guaranteed you're going to be talking to me on the phone with a pencil and paper in your hand, walking across the tool, rewriting down serial numbers of the ECU. So there should be no reason that you should ever be into this icon here unless you're directly instructed by me or one of our technicians to get in there and make them setup changes. So once this drill is set up, we should only be coming into the setup of the seat icon to turn them towers on and off. So just something that I want you to be clear on, that you can accidentally make a cumbersome change by going into the setup wizard. To turn the sensors on and off, it's real simple. If you want to turn a whole tower off, you just touch it and turn it off. If you want to turn off an individual run, you just touch it and it will X out. As you're going through the field, when the product is flowing, the little box with the tower will be green. If they're not flowing, they will be red, and if they are turned off, they will have an X cross through them. Wear items on drills. So the drill world has really gotten overlooked as far as wear items, and these wear items are extremely important for the job that these air drills will do. The big one is the front main drawbar pin. And here's a picture I took out of a drill on the wear. And what is happening, that blade is setting at a 9-degree angle. And that blade is always trying to flex back to be straight. It always is cutting and trying to pull back to straight. Now the more war that this pin gets, the less of an angle that blade is cutting at, the less residue cutting, and the more seed to soil contact happens in the seed boot. So as that blade goes straight, no longer is the blade opening the trench, now the seed boot is having to cut the trench, which causes an extreme amount of wear on the seed boot, which I'm going to talk about here in a minute. But basically, if you have the drill folded up, a good way to check is take a tape measure to the end of the blade and try to lift that roll unit up in the air as it's folded up, or move it side to side. And anything more than a 1/2 inch of side play will cause significant opener decreased function. So we need to be very conscientious of these main drill pins and these main bushings. I know there's a lot of aftermarket companies offering pins and bushings. From my firsthand experience, I would not recommend putting in aftermarket pins and bushings. The job is a very tough job to put these pins and bushings in. It is a tedious job, and I've seen up to 80% decreased wear from aftermarket versus John Deere. And if you have to go through that work to do that, it is not a fun conversation to have once them pins and bushings are wore out from aftermarket. The OEM ones have been lasting, upwards of 20,000 acres. So if you can get that type of wear out of them, I don't know why you wouldn't put an OEM pin and bushing back in. So this is a very important wear point that gets often overlooked. The other point is here where the boot goes into the shank, there is a pin that goes through there, and what that pin does, it can wear, and the shank and the boot can wear as well, causing the tip of the boot to move up and down. So as you get into a harder soil, the boot will slide up, and then as you get into a more mellow soil, the boot will slide down. I've seen them boots, the tip of the boot move upwards of 1.5 inches. And if you're trying to plant soybeans at 1 inch depth, you can go from inch depth to being on top of the ground. So this is very important to be checking basically the up and down movement of the boot for wear, whether we need to be replacing boots, or we need to be replacing the bolts that go through the boot, or we need to be looking at installing a bushing kit in that boot to tighten up a worn casting. So these are very important items to be looking at on these drills. The Pro Series openers, so last year was the first year available on the 1890s factory installed, and the year before was the first year for the 1895. Now the thing I really like about the new Pro Series opener is where I just got done talking about that bolt that can wear on the main casting. The factory Pro Series openers, the ones that come on the drill ordered from the factory new, they have a flag pin. So no longer are we wearing this bolt on this big main casting. Now the pin is held into place onto that big main casting, so it will only wear the pin in the boot as it should, rather than wearing out that main casting. So that is one of the big things I really like on these factory Pro Series openers, is that flag pin. Those of you that are starting to get some age on these drills and having some wear points, a good option is a Pro Series retrofit. So what is encased in this Pro Series retrofit kit? You get a new opener blade, you get a new firming wheel, a new boot, a new closing wheel, a new seat tab, and a new spring. Now what changed in all these components is the seat tab. So before, historically, we had this white wide seat tab, and as we all know, these seat tabs were really never effective until they were wore out, because they had to basically V off before they actually laid in the trench and did a good job of creating a good seat to soil contact. The Pro Series seat tabs are actually formed correctly for the trench, so they do their job right out of the box. So you install them and they work as they should. The closing wheel spring, if anybody's ever experienced this, when you fold up your drill, the closing wheel spring falls out of the tab, and then when you unfold, you got to go back and rehook that tab. On the Pro Series retrofit springs, you can see there's a larger gap here, and what that does, it prevents wear, because this point is moving up and down all day, rubbing against the next coil, where here where it's moving up and down is actually away from that next coil, so it is not contacting for that wear. And the second thing it does, it creates a tighter tension against that arm, so that spring is not flopping out of place and coming unconnected to that closing wheel arm. The other thing that has changed is the seed boot. So the seed boot has become narrower. So for one, it gives less soil disturbance. And remember how I talked about that wear item when your flag pins are getting wore? With the narrower seed boot, we're getting less soil to boot contact. So with less soil disturbance, we're getting less wear on that boot as well. And here's a comparable. You can see the red is the new style seed boot, and then the green is the historic style seed boot. You can see it's much wider, and it's doing much more contact with the soil than the new narrower seed boot. The press wheel has also changed. So the press wheel has narrowed and it has also incorporated a double row of bearings. Uh, as you know, this is a smaller wheel, and if you're doing 6 mile an hour, that wheel is spinning real fast. So with the double row of bearings, it basically doubled the life of them bearings inside that press wheel. And it also is a more flexible wheel, which allows the seed to actually contact it more when you're going around a corner. It'll actually follow that curved trench versus the more rigid historic style press wheel. The closing wheel, we have a serrated option now, which works very well in hard soils and high residue. Those of you that are in really sandy soils where you're doing tillage ahead of it, or if the soil is really loose, you probably still want to stay with the standard solid wheel. But if you're going into planting soybeans into corn stalks, or if you're into really hard compacted soils, the serrated closing wheel does a really improved job over the historic cast wheel, the cast smooth wheel. So as far as pricing on these Pro Series retrofit kits, from now until April 30th, we are able to save $25 a row. This is a kickback from John Deere. So on these kits are coming in 8-row kits or 2-row kits. If you price it, an 8-row kit ends up being a $224 per row. And if you look, I pulled up the leading competition, and they are $298 a row for the same comparable parts, and their kit does not include the closing wheel spring. So this is a pretty significant price savings over the leading competition. So it's a good option to look at getting these kits before we lose that $25 per row savings. With that, I thank you for taking the time to listen into this. As I stated earlier, if you have any questions, please call one of us. We're more than willing to help. If there's something else that you want discussed, shoot me a text, shoot me an email, call me. I can republicize another one of these trainings and shoot it out to you and shoot it out to everybody else. We got time yet until we're going to hit the field, so we got time to do a little bit of training and product knowledge to get out to you. So once again, I thank you for everything and have a wonderful day.